So, welcome to this month's Schuman Talk after our summer break. We're going to be discussing issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schumann's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. You see, it was on May the 9th, 1950, at 6 p.m., that the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundation for the European House, where today 500 million Europeans live together in peace and cooperation. And I see this as being the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched the European movement for peace and unity that's led to today's European Union. That's why we hold these talks on the 9th day of the month at 6 p.m. Ever since then, there's been unprecedented peace between the EU member states. And unfortunately, this peace has been shattered, not between EU member states, but shattered on our borders beginning last year. Well, actually, it had already been shattered earlier, 2014 and even before. And that's the reality that we live in today. But Schuman was a devout Catholic, schooled in Catholic social thinking, which began with understanding humans as created in God's image, the imago Dei. And this shaped all his politics, as well as the politics of those he worked with, people like Konrad Adenauer, Alcide de Gasperi, also fellow Catholics, schooled in the same thinking, as they then were able to shape the form of Europe as it emerged after the Second World War, particularly after in the 1950s. You see, no matter how important we are as humans, God's image is still to be seen in each of us. And when we depart from this starting point that we've been created in God's image, we really have real problems arising. And so today's talk is focusing on the place of disabled people in our European society. When we drift away from our biblical roots, we redefine what a human is, and serious challenges arise concerning the concepts of dignity and sanctity of life. Personhood today is being separated from simply being a human. People are saying, oh, we're not a person until a later stage of life. And this is bringing new threats into our European society. And today I'm going to be talking to two real heroes of my wife and myself, advocates for the disabled. That is Thérèse Swinters and Martina Köninger. And they're joining us from Belgium, Thérèse, and from Germany, Martina. Welcome to this month's Schuman Talk.
Thank you.
Martina, coming from Germany, I want to know, how old were you in 1989? Were you old enough to remember the events that were taking place on October the 9th, 1989? That was, what was that, 34 years ago, as the Iron Curtain began to crumble. And I'm thinking of a special event that took place in Leipzig, the peace and prayer movement that was centered on the St. Nicholas Church. Can you remember that?
Actually, I remember the night when the wall came down. People were climbing over the wall, and at that time I wasn't even in Germany. I was in England, and my host family they took me down to see the news on TV, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought, wow. Now this is happening in my country and I'm not even at home. So that was just unbelievable. Yeah, it was.
Were you aware of what took place exactly a month earlier? So what you saw with the wall coming down, that was November the 9th. And this is October the 9th, a month before what took place in Leipzig in East Germany. Were you aware at the time of that?
Yes, I knew about what happened, about these demonstrations, about these peaceful demonstrations and prayer movement. Actually, I myself, I grew up in the West, but my parents, they were refugees from Eastern Germany when they were children. So I have lots of relatives in Eastern Germany. And when I was 17 years old, first time, I had the chance to visit some of my relatives in Eastern Germany. It was the first time I even met my grandmother, and I realized all these tension, this not to know whom to trust. So the people were so very afraid, and at that time I didn't believe that anything good could change so soon. So that was really amazing. It was a miracle.
Yes, indeed, and that's what the BBC called that. What took place in Leipzig that night on October the 9th was the march that knocked out communism, that KO'd communism. And what we have in previous Schuman talks focused on a whole evening on this on October the 9th, but there was in the church that we can see in that photo. This is St. Nicholas Church in Leipzig, where there was every Monday night a prayer meeting for peace. And the pastor's name, the Pfarrer, was named Führer, as in leader, Pfarrer Führer. He was the one who started these prayer meetings, and they began to grow. And so much so that the Stasi sent along their spies, and a lot of these Stasi people were there, the Secret Service people. But the Pfarrer was very aware of that. He knew he had a captive audience who would speak from the Sermon on the Mount. And eventually it grew into a huge crowd on this particular night, October the 9th, crowd of 70,000 thronging through the city center, marching past the feared headquarters, as the BBC report put it, of the Stasi secret police, saying, "We are the people." And about 6,000 armed police and plainclothes Stasi were watching on the side streets, but they held back. They were vastly outnumbered. Not only that, they were they wanted to provoke violence, and they wanted to wade into this crowd, but everybody had a candle and was protecting the candle with their hand from the wind, and they were not at all going to respond to any provocation. And later, the Stasi leader said, "We were ready for anything except candles." And so the grip of communist propaganda on the people's behavior had been broken. This was a very key night, and it's just very good for us to begin by recalling this anniversary. So, Martina and Thérèse, I want to ask each of you for your stories. You've both been disabled. It may have been from birth, it may have been from an accident. One of the best known people who has a disabled ministry in the world is Joni Eareckson. And of course, it was a diving accident when she was a teenager that caused her situation. Thérèse, what was... were you born with a condition? How did your situation begin?
I was born with spina bifida. That is a condition that is very well known and seen very early in the conception of. And so I was born not with paralyzing situations, what happens very often by spina bifida, but my leg was misformed and my back and hip. So since then, since my birth, I could not walk normally on two legs. But then I became 6 and the doctors operated me, and since then I can work on a prosthesis. I was raised in a Catholic school for disabled girls in that time, and so it was really a separate thing from society. You had to later on get used to the whole society. So it is a strange thing to raise, to get older, and then you get a teenager, and then that's the difficult time with disability. But later on, it became all very well. I don't know if you'd like to.
Well, we've known each other for more than 20 years, and we've been very much involved together in the movement called Hope for Europe. Later on, we'll talk more about the network, the Disabilities Network for Europe, DNE, where both of you are involved, and both of you have been battling against people's attitudes, both within Christian society and beyond. And we want to talk about these challenges that you face. But Martina, could you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, my story is different. I was not born with a disability, but I have a spinal cord injury from a car accident. That was 30 years ago. And I had just, with my fiance, just a week before, we had arranged that we wanted to get married a year later. And then 1 week later, I had this accident. And after the accident, I first thought, of course, God is going to heal me, because if you read the Bible, if you read Matthew, everybody's going to be healed. So I want to become missionary with my husband together. So there was no question for me. God is going to heal me, of course, because, and only time after time, nothing happened. And then I realized that God might be something else doing with me, or whatever should be my perspective. So that was very difficult for me to find, as a believer, a good perspective on how to deal with this situation. And there was some time I was really then angry with God, because I didn't understand why he would not do what I read in the Bible. And I hear everybody, there's healing sermons and church services. So I didn't understand this. And then later, very much later, I realized the difference that I had in God. I had the person to deal with, to be angry with, whereas other people in the clinic where I was, in the rehabilitation center, first I was jealous on them, because they wouldn't not have to deal with faith or with believing or with some kind of God, because they didn't believe. But then I realized that this is something valuable, because I had someone I could talk to and I could be angry at, instead of just talking to walls or the ceiling or nothing, and just having to deal with it by yourself. So only very much later I realized this as a valuable, precious thing, that God is there. Yeah.
That reminds me very much of some of the Psalms, where the psalmist is almost, speaking angrily to God, and we might feel, oh, this is sacrilegious, this is non-respectful, but their attitude was, you can't be angry with God. Who can you be angry with? Who can you share your deepest feelings? And there's examples of this in the Psalms. Is lament. This is a whole aspect that we sometimes we try to suppress with the wrong kind of spirituality, thinking everything's got to be victorious. So that's a very valuable testimony. Thank you.
I really encourage everyone who has to deal with hard situations to express the feeling to God, because I think bitterness arises when you push this down, because it's a process. You need to deal with it, and it's a process, and you go through this process with God together, like in the Psalms. The Psalms are very helpful and encouraging for me in this time, because they are so honest. And then they find, at the end, they find peace with God. But it's a battle, and you cannot avoid this battle. It will end in bitterness. That's what I believe, or depression, maybe.
Yes. Well, how have you both found that people's attitude towards your disability, whether in the church or in society generally? Thérèse, how I know that there's been one of the battles is dealing with a wrong understanding about disability, and you can articulate that far better than I can.
Yes, I think the worst part of my life was, of course, when I was raised in the Catholic school, and then came into at home for the rest of my life, in fact. But that was loneliness, a lot of loneliness there. And I asked myself, why am I here and what can I do and how is this disability for any use of it. And so very soon after I was ready with my school, I came in contact with evangelical Christians. And I said already, I was raised Catholic, but then I came in contact with evangelical Christians. And when I talked with them, they teach me that the gospel is much more practical than only rituals that I was used to. And so I learned to know the Bible very much better, and I learned to know God also better. And indeed, God is somebody, and Jesus is somebody who can give you the trust and the assurance that He has a plan, and He knows how your life will be the best. I was never really bitter about my disability, I think. But then, when I was a Christian for about 10 years, evangelical Christian, I asked myself, is it okay by God that I am disabled? Or does He maybe like to heal me? And so I asked my leaders of the church to help me think about that, and to on one moment take time to pray for my healing, although I was not really longing for that healing. Was okay with me to live with a disability. But then they came and pray, and that was at the end of October 1989. And I still wonder why that goes together with that special time in my life and what special happens in Germany. For me, I was really aware of what was happening there in Germany, and also I saw that on television the wall coming down. But just a few days before, the pastors prayed for me, and one of the pastors said, "Thérèse, maybe we will not see God's answer, but you will get an answer from God." And that is a prophecy for me till now, that I think, yes, because what was my deepest problem was that I didn't have a goal in my life. I didn't have a husband, not children, not a real interesting work to do. So I asked myself, why am I disabled? Why is that still there? And so the Lord didn't heal me, but He gave me a task, a thing to do. And that is this disability ministry, talking about disability and helping the church and the church leaders to include as much as possible all those who are in their church with an issue in their body or in their mind or wherever, who you can call disabled. And so I think before, in my younger years, disability was not interesting. Nobody was talking about it. And if they talked about it, it was, "Oh, you dear, you have a disability." And so, but then at that moment that I realized God has a goal for me, uh, everything became very more useful in my life, even my disability. And so that is why I think it's so important to talk openly about disability. And in my teenage, nobody did that.
Thank you, Thérèse. Martina, what has been your experience in people's attitudes, and have you noticed a difference, say, from Eastern Germany and Western Germany?
Yeah, well, the first thing was when I came home from this rehabilitation center, I was so shocked that the people in the church, they couldn't deal with my situation. it was so difficult. They didn't know how to behave towards me. They were like staring at me or giving me money. I mean, I'm not poor. I don't I don't need money. So even in the street, sometimes people were trying to give me money. My husband, he sometimes made fun of me and said he will put the the air out of my wheels and put me in the corner and then later collect me back. So to earn some money or just some jokes.
Yeah.
That's how he made it about that. But that was really shocking. And also that so many churches are not accessible. I didn't realize that before. Even my own church, there are stairs, and they were refusing to put a ramp there or to do something about it. And of course, in Eastern Germany, it's worse than in the West because of the poor condition. And yeah,
Well,
and
this question of accessibility is something that Thérèse has certainly taught to both myself and Romke. We often comment as we're in a place, we would say, well, Thérèse wouldn't approve of this, or we would say, this is not a good place for disabled people. It's made us alert to it. But indeed, what are the mental blockages that people have? Even in terms of why somebody is suffering. This is not a new question. This is a question that Jesus answered too. Would you like to comment on that, either of you?
I would first say that I'm not suffering. I mean, my accident is a long time ago. It's about 30 years ago. And most of the time during the day, I don't think about me being suffering or being disabled. I just think of a normal person. I did marry after the accident finally, and I got 3 kids. So I had just almost normal life with just some more challenges to overcome. I would call it this challenges than other people, but I'm not suffering. So, but this is one issue. People think that people with disability, they are suffering, but we have fun. We have just normal people. Of course, there's after the injury, there is some time in hospital and there is some suffering, and then there is, like I expressed before, uh, you have to deal with the situation. But then at the end, even most of the people I know, they are not suffering. So this is something misconception people have. They see me in a wheelchair and I think, wow, I'm suffering. But maybe some other person who looks quite healthy and has no obvious problems, maybe they can suffer much more because maybe they lost some relatives, maybe they have some kind of sickness you don't see, or some depression, psychological problems, whatever. So you cannot see how, if a person is really suffering, or how they feel.
Well, we read about the disciples saying to Jesus, why was this person born blind? Is it his fault? Where is the sin? Thérèse, you've probably been asked that question many times.
Yeah, that's true. And still a lot of parents from children with a disability, they feel guilty about they have a disabled child. And churches are not really answering that question. They are not guilty. But indeed, the Lord gives a very clear answer that he, by this blind man in the Bible, that he says it's not about the parents guilty or the person himself guilty. It's about my glory will be coming open and clear for everyone, and that's what I think that we should um, give the accent. Why is Martina doing this wonderful things, and why is she living a normal life? Because the Lord's glory should come out of her life, because she is a picture where a build of yeah. How do you say that again? Well, anyway, and
He's
that's the
displaying this
same.
glory. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the same thing for myself. I can say that it's because of the Lord that I can live a free and very nice life, in fact. And I think that's the same for everybody who is capable of understanding these things. But I think that disability is also the other side. There is suffering by some people. There is pain in the families where somebody is with a disability. And so we have to look at both sides. But people putting you in one side and you are disabled and you are suffering and you are poor and that's not true.
Yeah. Now, I've heard you say, Thérèse, that in some ways, the disabled community are a hidden people, and they find themselves a minority within a minority. Can you explain that more?
Yeah, then we have to look at the statistics, for instance. 10 till 15% of the whole society are people with a recognized, officially recognized disability. So if you look at that in, for instance, the 8 million billiard people in the world, well, 800 million are disabled.
Now, does that
That's
mean people with glasses or hearing aids? Is that what you're talking about?
no, the real recognized um, people with a disability, and there are several lists in the World Health Organization. They give the criteria of what is a disabled person.
Yeah.
So it's not only a glasses and something like that,
Yeah.
but it's this list that gives us an idea who is really a disabled person and who should get government payment or whatever.
So thinking about Europe, how many million people is that? So let's say in Western Europe, 500 million, or that's actually a bit more than that. That's the EU. You're saying that 10%,
Well, let's say 10% at least.
that's 50 million. But
Yeah.
you could say 15% would be 75 million.
Yeah.
That's the whole population of a big country.
Well, that's the wonderful thing to say. If you take these people, that's about the same, almost the same amount of people in Germany.
Yeah.
If you bring this group of people together in one country, you have the poorest country in the world. You have the least educated people in the world. And all these criteria that we look into countries in Europe, the worst situation is in this country. And so
the most
also,
unreached. Yeah.
what, Martina?
Sorry, the most unreached from the gospel.
Unreached and unreached with the gospel. And that's a huge task that we could take on.
Is that a question of accessibility? Is it a question of, say, blind or deaf, or what are the barriers for them to be reached?
Well, first of all, accessibility of the buildings where they meet, getting into the buildings, that's the next thing. Then the whole preaching and teaching about the gospel is for a lot of people not possible on the same level as the normal people get it. So we have to do something about that. And all these kind of things are playing with us. You can talk about the different disabilities that you have as big categories, and mostly we use about five categories. That's the physical disabled, that's like Martina and me, with not really a learning disability. So we can, if we can enter the building, we can enjoy the normal community, but that's not always possible for us. Then you have the learning disabled people, of course, and you can call them in different languages otherwise, but we are talking about people who don't understand very well in the minds. They have a lot of problems to get somewhere and understand. Then the blind people are, I would almost say, these are the least difficult group, because you lead them to the church and they can join like everybody else. But not always, of course. The deaf people, Martina has more experience about that. And then you have the hidden, the unseen disabilities. Those who have a disability in their organs, in their inner body. And then the people we are not really talking mostly about it are the psychiatric patients and all these kind of groups, and the depressed people and so. So in the world, this is the 15% that you can talk about. Well, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, Martina, what do you observe?
I mean, with this statistic, you can break it down and say that every 7 person in the world has a disability. So if the situation or the amount of people in society should be mirrored in the church, so then you can go to your church and see every 7 person has a disability, then it would mirror the same situation as it is in society. And if not, then you know that those people are missed. They are not included in the church.
Now, in Western Europe, there's probably a much higher degree of even government help than in a lot of other parts of the world. What is the situation that you know of in Eastern Europe? Is that improving?
It's still a big problem. We are trying from Western Europe with our EDN network to support our partners in Eastern Europe, like with bringing them some supply, helping them. At the moment, we are thinking about building a rehab center in Albania, because in Albania at the moment there's not one rehabilitation center. So if a person has an accident or anything, disabling situation, then they have only hospital, and then they are at home with no help. So, and of course, those people, they cannot be included in society or in the church or anything. So it's still quite a challenge in the situation in Eastern Europe.
So you just talked about the EDN, the European Disabilities Network. I think I called it the DNE before, but European Disabilities Network. Who is part of that, Thérèse? You have a lot of different organizations, or are they individuals? I think we have a photo of a gathering, one of your gatherings there. Can you tell me, who do they represent?
Well, these are people from several different countries in Europe. Some are responsible for a local or a national organization for people with disability, based on a Christian, on evangelical basis, of course. And so I see here the UK is in that picture with 2 or 3 different people. Germany is there with several other people. Um, so you can see that a lot of people are representing or a local or a national organization uh, to work towards integration, inclusion uh, of people with disability. We always say that they're working in their own area with their own money that they can gather, with their own possibilities. And if we can support each other, then we try to do that. But we are not an organization as European Disability Network. We
No.
are really a network, so everybody is responsible for themselves.
Yes, yes. Now, Martina, when the war broke out in Ukraine last year, what was your response?
Well, we had with our EDN network, we had in 2009, we had the conference in Kiev, and there I got to know a couple which had quite similar situation as me, like the wife was in the wheelchair, and they had also been involved before with helping people with drug addicts, and like me and my husband. So we had so much in common that I got friend with them, and then I was in contact with them since 2009. And of course, when the war broke out, suddenly I was very shocked, and I just wrote them a message. We are praying for you, because I didn't know anything else. And then one of our partners from England, he said he's going with his vehicle now into Ukraine and takes 4 people out of Ukraine with disability, and then it makes a difference for those 4 people. And that triggered me, and I asked in my own working group. I'm leading in the German Evangelical Alliance working group called Perspective Forum Disability, and I asked if someone could go along with him. And then we finally were able to go with 6 cars, with 6 vehicles, where you can put wheelchairs inside, with 6 vans into Ukraine, and took a group out of 35 people, Ukrainians with a disability, including their family members and their caretakers, and then took them out of Ukraine. And at that point, I still had not a place for them, but I was trying and calling and asking anywhere. And I said, okay, worst thing which would happen to be in a refugee center, which is not accessible, but still better than war, because we were so afraid that maybe Belarus would do something. And they were very close to Belarus border. But finally, we found near Stuttgart a Christian guest house. They said yes to the whole group to come.
Wow.
And then I thought, okay, now it's finished. And then from Ukraine, there came the question, oh, Martina, we have 42 more people. Can you take them as well? And I don't know, I couldn't say no. So again, I tried to find some vehicles and some more people, and we took them out. And which was very good that the secretary of the German Evangelical Alliance, he realized this happening, and he told me that everything I do here, I do in the name of the Evangelical Alliance, and he gave me free hand to organize all this. So, and then we could, with the platform of the Evangelical Alliance, we could ask for sponsoring, for finances, we could ask for drivers, for more vehicles. So, and I could asked for buses and everything. So at the end, there were more than 500 people,
Wow.
which were taken out of Ukraine, some in the Netherlands, and most of them in Germany, and one group now is in Switzerland. And we realized that was really some miracles happening. The most challenging thing was always to find accessible places for the whole groups. The biggest group was 57 people or something. So finding accessible places for their whole groups, that was really challenging, and that was really God was working in that. That was wonderful. Yeah.
Have any of them been able to return, or is it too early for that?
Some people, I think it's too early, but some people, not many, but some people decided to return because they felt homesick. They had hard time to adapt, learn the language. There were so many challenges. They decided to go home, but not so many. Most of the people are still in the countries or in the place. Yeah.
That's really encouraging to hear. Yeah. So, Thérèse, how long have you been involved with the European Disabilities Network? It didn't have a name to begin with, and I think you were working with Jonathan McCrosty, who was a well-known Operation Mobilization leader, who very sadly also had an accident when the driver fell asleep coming home from an OM conference, and he was therefore disabled for the rest of his life. He passed away, what, 5 or 6 years ago, is it? Or
I think already a little bit more, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But I got, well, in fact, the whole issue that I said that leaders of my church were praying for me. In fact, right after that, I got a question from somebody who was visiting Romania, and they came back from that little visit and they said, Les, can you find out more information about disabled people, and on a Christian base, in it French or English, and how should they handle people with learning disability in that country? And so I thought, why? Where do I get that information from? And so I wrote to a few people here, and I wrote to Johnny and friends in America, and they helped a little bit with somebody was already involved in Romania. But right after the 90s, in fact, Joni and friends decided to come to Europe and open an office from Joni and Friends in Brussels. And that's, in fact, where Jonathan and a few other people and myself were trying to bring that what was already there in Europe together. And so this is, in fact, first of all, 5 years of Joni and Friends in Brussels with two little conferences, one in Dalfsen in Holland and one in Budapest in Hungary. And so that's, in fact, the basic contacts with the people in Europe. And then after 5 years, they decided to stop the office. It was not really possible to work effectively. And so we decided together here in Europe to start a little network. And we had one person who was a facilitator. And after 3 years, in 2004, I became the facilitator of this network.
What year was the Budapest conference? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it must be beginning of the 90s. I can look up.
Middle. Yeah, I was involved.
Yeah, I know.
Seeing that, and that's when I discovered that Joni and I actually were born the same week. It really made me think, wow, suppose I'd been the one who'd had.
So you have your birthday today in a week or so.
Yeah, it was the beginning of September, and yeah. But what really struck with me was she said, well, I just look day to day and ask God for grace to face each day as it comes. And of course, she's been used in such a tremendous platform. She might have gone on to be, a champion diver or swimmer or something like that. But what she has accomplished in terms of what you were talking about before, God's glory, in her life and ministry has been amazing.
Yeah. But there is a nice differences between what she is doing and what we are doing in Europe. She is trying to encourage people, help them to understand that suffering is not the end with the Lord and so on. And we are more focusing on inclusion, people getting into the groups of Christians.
Yes.
And that's nice to see.
In the years that you've been networking, what has changed and what still needs to change?
I think that the most important thing that changed is at least that we find each other and that people more talking about it, although it's still very difficult. If we see somewhere in conferences that we are invited in to do a workshop, people are not choosing that workshop. And so that should be changed. The other thing is that very slowly the theologians are trying to get in and to talk about disability and these kind, and that would help a lot in a lot of communities.
Yeah, that would be very important. As I said in my testimony before, that I had so many problems in how to theologically deal with my situation and not getting healed, and how to understand. So this would be very important to have a change there, or teaching on how to deal with it.
Yes. Well, we've been very weak in our Christian circles, really, on the theology of the body, and we stress the spirit over the body, and yet, everything we do is with the body, and creation is all about the physical, and of course, the incarnation is all about God coming into a human body. The resurrection was about the body rising, and the second coming that we look forward to is about the physical side. And of course, this is where we come to our Christian hope of that, well, as Paul puts it in Romans 8, the whole of creation itself is groaning, waiting to be liberated from its bondage to decay. And this is, of course, the Christian hope for us all. But too often we have succumbed to a kind of Gnosticism. That is, we put the spiritual over the physical. And I think that a theology of disability goes along with a theology of the body, very much needed. And I want to thank you very much for promoting an awareness and constantly championing the ministry of disabled people as well as to disabled people.
Well, Jeff, I disagree with you in some of what you just said, because I don't know. On one side, it's they say they take more on that the body is not so important than the spiritual thing. But in practical way, I mean, if that would be the truth, then people or the church or the theologians would say, okay, healing is not so important. You are just welcome as you are because your spirit is important. But this is not happening. So I think that maybe we think the spirit is more important in theology, and in practical, we act exactly the opposite, as if the body would be the most important, because otherwise we would not so much depend on we need healing. This is about body. If we would not talk or teach so much about healing, then we would say, okay, it's not so important. When we go to heaven, when we go to Jesus, everyone will have a new body anyway. So you come just as you are. But so there's some discrepancy.
But I think also that a lot of people not disabled people, they don't think about the fact that their body will change when they go to heaven. And so I very often say to people, do you think that you go to heaven with that body, what you have now? Is that different with my body? Yeah, no, that's not good enough to go to heaven, probably. And so you have to open their mind and their thinking about the fact that something will change, and what you have now is only for 70 or 90 years. And
yes,
yeah.
This gets us beyond our ability to know and reason it all out. It's a mystery. Yeah. And yet, with the discoveries of DNA and so on, we realize that who we are is actually summed up in a code, DNA code, that God has not forgotten. And how we will be resurrected? Are we going to be resurrected as 33-year-olds? We don't know. There's going to be some continuity as well as discontinuity. There is a sense in it which is a renewed body, not a brand new, just like when Peter is talking about renewed heavens and renewed earth. It's not brand new heaven, not brand new earth. It's restored. And so, yeah, again, we're getting into areas that we can speculate on. We have to recognize there are some things that are just mystery, and even the understanding of God being all-knowing and all-loving and all-powerful, and yet allowing all sorts of things to happen that are negative. Here we're encountering mystery as well, and we have to fall back on the character of our God. But your perspectives really do challenge people like myself, because you're speaking from experience, and has been greatly enriching for Romke and myself to have known you both and to see you at work, bringing awareness that wouldn't be there if you weren't in these conferences. And I think we've been involved in a number of different conferences in many different places around Europe together. And I want to thank you for being ambassadors in this way. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
Well, maybe the thing that I'm very often say is to people say to me, how should I handle people with disability? What should I say? Well, be open, be normal, see them as a person, not as a disabled one. That is, of course, something that everybody says, but think about it and do it. And so I always say, they say to me, Thérèse, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to disappoint you. I don't want to do something. And I said, I live for several years with my disability. You can't disappoint me anymore. But be open, because when you neglect me, then you do disappoint me.
So you're encouraging people when they come into contact with the disabled people to engage in conversation, ask them, how can I help you?
Yeah.
Because
Joni says, what about just hello, how are you? And start.
Engaging in normal conversation. Yeah. Martina, you were saying how people didn't know how to respond to you, giving you money and so forth. What's your advice?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for giving us the platform, the chance to talk about this. I would like to add, especially for believers who think that when people get healed, then other people would realize God's power and would repent and come to faith. But I experience pretty opposite, because non-believers, they see maybe more in us the hope and joy, and why are you so happy, and they are more open, they listen to me more than before, and they realize that we have something they not have, because then they tend to see more God in us than, I would say, maybe sometimes with God heals. Okay, he heals and then it's over. But how can you go through all this? And what is it what gives you this hope and joy? So this is also a testimony that people with disability who are in phase and who have gone through this whole process can give and add to the church. And this is missing in the church if you not include those people.
Yes. And Paul talked about his strength is made perfect in my weakness. He spoke about the thorn in his flesh. Are there any instances that come to your mind where you say, well, yeah, because of my weakness, God was glorified, God's strength was shown? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that people listen more to me. And this is also, I mean, Paul, he had a disability. People are not aware of this reading the Bible, and he healed many people. Not he, but through God. He was praying for people and people got healed, but he himself stayed with a disability and he kept this. There are some discussions if it's a sight or whatever, what kind of disability, but it's a disability. And there are more people in the Bible who have a disability. But this is also a theological issue that needs teaching about this, that this is a normal thing which happens. And yeah.
That's true.
Thank you. Thérèse, any last comment?
Well, I'm very thankful that we could do this together, and that you already know for a long time that we work on this issue, and how you handle this interview is, thank you so much for that again. But indeed, disability is not something that you should walk away from. Engage with it, and then, yeah, it helps.
Thank you very much indeed. This has been very enriching to chat with you again. Okay, well, we'll close off here. And thank you very much, Thérèse, Martina. And we hope to be back next month with a new guest. Good night.